Good afternoon, AICon, and thank you for the invitation to speak. I want to make a serious argument today, and it's uncomfortable even for me, but I believe it's correct. My argument is in the title here, that renting intelligence is a dangerous way to run a country. If you bear with me over the next 20 minutes, I will cover my thesis in 3 acts and pose a single question. There's a particular compliment Canada hears in international AI circles. We are described genuinely as smart, and it's a flattering word. It feels good to hear, but it also is a revealing one. Smart is the word the world uses for countries that produce excellent research and then watch other countries commercialize it. We host the conferences, we publish the papers, we train the talent, we anchor the citations, and then we rent the platforms our own researchers spent their careers creating the engines for. We've become the smartest tenant in someone else's building. And those buildings have landlords that we are increasingly becoming wary of because landlords can change terms. My thesis is this: Canada discovers, others deploy. That gap between discovery and deployment is where national capability is either built or quietly forfeited. In artificial intelligence, that gap has never been wider, and it's never closed faster against the country that fails to close it. Hold one question with me the rest of this talk. The question is not whether Canada can invent. That question is answered. The question is whether Canada can execute. I don't know the answer, and I believe it is the most important question this country has not yet asked itself with the seriousness it requires. So here are my 3 acts. Act number 1, power has changed. The markers of national strength that define the 20th century, territory, steel, oil, have all been replaced by markers we cannot photograph. Act number 2 is that AI is a new space race. It's messier than the old one and quieter. There's no rocket to fill publicly, and there's no Sputnik moment to focus the country's mind. Act 3 is what do we do next? Together. No single actor, sector, university, government, industry can do this work alone. Power has changed for most of human history. Power had a body, you could draw it on a map, you could weigh it in tons, you could count the rigs, the rail miles, the factory floors, you could fly over it and see it from the air. The new market of power is harder to photograph. It hums at 11 watts per square meter in a windowless building outside Phoenix. Most of us don't know it's there, and it's quietly, more strategically consequential than half the cities the 20th century considered powerful. Capability is not a prototype. It's not a pilot, it's not a press release, it is not a photograph of 3 people standing in front of a server rack with a ribbon. Capability is what survives Monday morning. It's a system that delivers at scale inside a real institution without a vendor in California on the phone. Energy grids, tax systems, hospitals, ports, defense, research itself. What we tend to build instead is something else. An invoice arrives, the AI reads it, it hands the invoice to a person who hands it to another person who hands it to finance, and we end up calling this automation. There's a precedent for this kind of mistake. When television was first invented in the late 1940s, the early programming was actually quite simple. They took radio announcers and they placed them in front of cameras and asked them to read their scripts. That form was new, the content was old, the approach was old, and it took the industry the better part of a decade to understand the medium itself demanded something different. I think we're in that decade now with artificial intelligence. We are putting radio announcers in front of the cameras and calling it television. So AI is infrastructure, and I want to really double down on this because we have not properly absorbed it. We still treat compute, data, energy, standards, and procurement as an expense line, as IT overhead, as something the CIO worries about between renewals. It's a substrate. The next century of public service, defense, posture, scientific output, and economic productivity will still sit on top of these decisions we're making, or not making, about that substrate right now. So our behavior on this point is a little bit strange, right? We are, as a country, very good at funding what people can see: bridges, highways, pipelines. We'll write a check for a piece of concrete every day of the week. We'll hold a press conference. We'll cut a ribbon. We will not generally write that check for the substations and the procurement reform that would let our researchers run at scale. Visible infrastructure gets budgets, invisible infrastructure gets admired, and unfortunately, you cannot run a country on admiration. So AI is the new space race, right? And there is a problem with that analogy. Apollo had a feature this new race does not. Rockets explode publicly on camera, with names attached, with grieving families on the evening news. Failure focused a country's attention in a way no other technology in modern history has. AI does not explode, it ships quietly, it updates overnight, and changes the terms in a click-through agreement that none of us read, right? By the time the country realizes the dependency has become its strategy, the strategy is no longer its own. In 1961, Kennedy at Rice University in Houston said something that everyone remembers, and it's the romantic one that gets quoted again and again. We choose to go to the moon. The line I want you to remember is this one. Dedication, organization, discipline. That is not inspiration. That is governance, and Apollo was not a science project. Apollo was a national capability engine built for a single strategic purpose to ensure that the United States was never again embarrassed in orbit. The Soviets had done it. A country looked at itself and decided that would never happen twice. The science came second, but the institution came first. Every generation seems to forget that order, and every generation seemingly has to relearn it. So where's our AI Apollo? What is the institution whose entire purpose is to translate Canadian research excellence into Canadian operational systems, whose performance is measured not in citations, but in capability delivered? Where's our DARPA? Not word science for its own sake, which I enjoy, but real capability, with a deadline, with a clock running, with someone whose career is at stake if the ship fails to land. I will tell you what I see when I look. A country that is brilliant at the front of the pipeline, but completely undefended at the back of it. For a small country like ours, it's a survivable mistake, but for a sovereign one, it's not. The modern shape of AI does not fit clearly into two acts. AI is compute plus energy plus infrastructure. If you remove any one of these, the algorithms are just a simple research paper. If you hold all three, the algorithms become a country's posture in the world. To Canada's credit, we have started to move. The Canadian Sovereign AI Compute Strategy commits $2 billion over 5 years, $300 million for subsidized compute access for small and medium businesses, $700 million for new public-private data center capacity through the AI Compute Challenge, and a further $1 billion for transformational public computing infrastructure. These are the right instruments, the right vocabulary, the right people in the room. However, they are not yet at the right scale. Other countries are committing tens of billions of dollars and pulling on a national energy policy, foreign investment policy, and procurement policy in coordinated support of these commitments. There is a fact that we do not discuss with enough seriousness in this country. There is no AI without electricity. The International Energy Agency projects that global data center electricity consumption will move from 415 terawatt hours in 2024 to roughly 945 by 2030, a doubling in 6 years. We've never seen this before. By the end of this decade, American data centers are expected to consume more electricity than the entire United States uses to produce aluminum, steel, cement, and chemicals combined. That binding constraint is not compute. It's not capital. It's literally the kilowatt at the bottom of the stack. Consider the most striking signal of where the world is heading. In September of 2024, Microsoft signed a 20-year power purchase agreement with Constellation Energy. That agreement restarts the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant. That's the site associated for nearly half a century with the 1979 partial meltdown and the public collapse of the nuclear ambition in America. They are not building a new reactor. They are restarting the dormant one. 835 megawatts dedicated to a single company's AI workloads. The country that solves the kilowatt question solves the model question. The country that does not will become renters. So in this new world, sovereignty is not a slogan. It's much more physical than that. Permits, grid capacity, interconnects, cooling, energy supply operators, procurement cycles, substations, concrete. I mean, the list goes on, right? And again, to Canada's credit, this is precisely where we have begun. 18 days ago, on May 11th, the federal government announced the first project under the Enabling Large-Scale Sovereign AI Data Centers Initiative. TELUS partnered with Ottawa and will build a sovereign AI factory cluster across 3 British Columbia facilities anchored on BC Hydro renewable power. It's clean, it's abundant, it's Canadian. Bell is investing a $1.7 billion in 300 megawatt facility outside Regina. And Cohere, which is headquartered in Toronto, is the language model partner on Bell's sovereign stack. There are no ribbon cut-ins for this work, and I think there should be, but that is what physical sovereignty actually looks like. It's being built quietly by Canadians in places too often overlooked in the national AI conversation. Announcements are not delivery, and I will not pretend otherwise, but the direction is right, and the direction matters because the cadence of technology is unforgiving. Training compute for notable AI models is now doubling every 5 months. 5. In the time required for a single Canadian environmental assessment to clear, frontier model compute will have doubled 2, possibly 3 times over. We are running at a governance tempo calibrated for a world that no longer exists. So the paradox and the unspoken second half. By almost any measure, Canada is a very serious AI research country. The talent is real, the institutions are real, the international standing was earned, and it's deserved. The hard part, and we should be willing to say this plainly, has never been the lab. The hard part has been the loading dock. World-class AI research, but we're a little bit amateur on its deployment. And again, that sentence is uncomfortable, and it should be, but is also the most accurate, right? The pan-Canadian AI strategy, over $443 million in phase 2 investment, SciFar, Mila, Vector, Amy, institutions other countries quietly try to copy, and then from the inside, the consulting profession that owns a share of the responsibility, we produce pilots, labs, press releases, proof of concepts, but none of these things become operating systems. A few weeks ago, I attended a global supply chain conference, 30,000 exhibitors. They had robots picking and packing and sorting end to end at a level of operation fluency that personally scared me. I asked one of the vendors there, a simple question: how's the uptake? Almost every one of them gave a version of the same answer: we can't deploy them. The customer's organizational structure does not accommodate the system. Nobody knows where the human is supposed to sit, and the technology is ready. And I think this is something that's repeating. The organizations are not, research excellence is necessary, but it's not on its own a development strategy. So we end up praying for innovation in this country, but we do not pray with anything like enough seriousness for the operating system that makes the innovation real. Innovation without procurement reform, ethics without compute sovereignty, public good without delivery authority, research excellence without national execution. Every left-hand word is true, everyone is good, everyone sounds like the kind of language Canadians prefer to use about ourselves, and everyone is empty without the weight of the right hand. What we have gotten wrong is architectural. In 1937, an economist named Ronald Coase published a short paper titled "The Nature of the Firm." He was eventually awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics for the argument it contained. The argument was deceptively simple. Companies exist, Coase said, because the cost of coordinating work inside a firm is lower than the cost of coordinating it across the market. Transaction costs is generally much higher outside the firm than within it. And that single insight has been the architectural premise underneath nearly every large institution built in the last 90 years. Major firms, government ministries, universities, hospitals, the size and shape of the modern world has taken that as its principle. But artificial intelligence is collapsing those coordination costs. The transactions that once justified the size and the shape of our institutions now cost a fraction of what they did. In some functions, the cost is approaching zero. We built the scaffolding for that one world. The substrate underneath it has been changing without us. A generation ago, a professional skill retained half of its value for 30 years. Today, the World Economic Forum estimates that figure at roughly 5. In technical fields, including artificial intelligence, the forum projects it will fall to 2.5 by 2030. The scaffolding has not caught up to the substrate, and the substrate is not waiting. So take one sentence with you from this room. A country cannot be sovereign in artificial intelligence if all it knows how to do is write papers about artificial intelligence. That is not an insult to our researchers. I used to be one. And our researchers are extraordinary. But it is a deployment challenge for our institutions. The papers are excellent. The runway underneath them is missing. I should not be misread as a pessimist. I am not. Canada builds with extraordinary discipline when organized around a central mission. The story is not that Canada cannot build. The story is mission discipline. We have it, we demonstrated it in every century of our national history. We have simply so far declined to demonstrate it in artificial intelligence. Look at what we have already built. Canadarm 2, Dexter, Canadarm 3. The most identifiable piece of equipment in the history of human spaceflight bears a Canadian flag. RadarSat, which produces daily intelligence the country depends on. Most Canadians have never heard of it. Insulin, the founders of stem cell biology. These are all pillars of modern medicine that the world rests on. A local example, since we're in Halifax, a short distance from this room, the Irvine Shipyard is currently building warships for the Royal Canadian Navy under the National Shipbuilding Strategy. Mission critical infrastructure, national strategic intent. There's deadlines, there's budgets, public accountability. Halifax has been physically producing the sovereignty of our country for nearly 3 centuries, and it's still producing it today. Mission critical infrastructure, I mean, they might be doing it right now for all I know. Mission critical infrastructure is not foreign to Canada. We have only been uneven in our memory of it. We have done this before, and we have somehow persuaded ourselves we cannot do it for artificial intelligence. And I disagree with that conviction strongly. Call this the capability compact. Universities will generate the knowledge and the talent. Canada does this work superbly. Government should define the missions and buy the outcomes, not the deliverables, but the outcomes. There's a difference between these two, and the difference contains most of the argument. Industry translates research into operational systems that survive contact with reality, and these 3 parties, these 3 roles, no one party can substitute for the other 2. When all 3 move together, a country produces Apollo. It produces the Canadarm. It produces insulin. It produces, in Halifax, a shipyard. When any one of these disengage, a country produces a press release. So, what fractures when the compact is weak and deserves specificity? Vague diagnoses produce vague treatments. Universities cannot scale national capability on their own. They are not built for that purpose. To ask them to do so is a category error. Industry will not build without clear missions and credible demand. Capital does not flow into ambiguity. It flows into anchored procurement and identified buyers. Government can't procure capability if it cannot tolerate learning. This is the hardest of the 3. In our procurement culture, learning and failure look identical on a balance sheet. Risk management in too many of our institutions has become risk avoidance. And risk avoidance at this speed of change is itself a form of risk. Canada does not need more AI strategies. We have a sufficient supply of strategies. I think what we need is more AI operators, people who ship. 3 moves: sovereign infrastructure that is actually usable, procurement that can buy learning, and capability institutions, not merely capability programs. So, move 1, build sovereign AI infrastructure that is actually usable. Treat compute the way a country treats electricity: uptime, access, security tiers, clear allocation rules. Energy planning on a multi-decade horizon, not a vanity supercomputer with a ribbon cutting, and a 36-month booking queue. The TELUS cluster in British Columbia, the Bell facility in Saskatchewan, the Cohere partnership, these are all first moves. They are not finished, but they are starting to get there. Move 2, procurement pathways that can buy learning. Now, this is a move that takes the most courage. It is also the one that almost no one campaigns on, right? The billable hour is a business model of the past. Last year, my own firm, and this episode is a matter of public record, KPMG UK approached its external auditor with a specific request. Your use of AI should be reducing your costs by 20%, so we're asking for a 15% fee reduction. Within days, other major clients of that auditor in the United Kingdom had requested the same, And then within weeks, they started asking KPMG for the same things. But I think this is a really good thing, because if Canadian public procurement cannot tolerate iteration, cannot pay for the learning curve, then it cannot purchase capability. It can only purchase artifacts that it had no hand in developing. The final move, so build capacity-capable institutions, not merely capability programs. Programs end, institutions persist. We are beginning to see what AI-native institutions actually look like. Inside, there is a continuous loop: sensing, coordinating, interpreting, deciding, executing, and learning. Humans positioned on exceptions and judgment calls, not humans positioned on data entry in the full AI-centric organizations we have studied. That is not a productivity story, that is a competitive existence story, and it's the gap Canada must close at the institutional level before the gap closes on us. So for my closing thought, it is the least romantic thing you'll hear today probably, but the world does not reward institutions, the world rewards logistics. Invoices, subscription fees, licensing, token rate cards, these are instruments through which sovereignty is actually exchanged in 2026. A country that does not own its own logistics, the substrate beneath the substrate, does not own its future. It pays a recurring fee to lease it. And the intellectual life of a country can be magnificent, but if the operating system beneath the intellectual life can belong to someone else, then both these statements can be true at the same time, and that's the danger. So my ask is simple. Universities, stop treating deployment as someone else's problem. The downstream is part of the science. If your work never lands in an institution that serves the public, you have not finished it. To the government, to my government friends, stop treating procurement as risk avoidance. Begin treating it as a nation building. Every contract is a vote for the version of Canada that will exist in 5 years. Risk avoidant procurement chooses the rented version of the country. And to my fellow industry peers, we must stop waiting for certainty. The market will not provide it. Build with the public, build with mission that matter, and anchor your capital in the country's real needs. Choose to build before the future is something this country can only afford to rent. And that's really what I came here to say. It's a choice, and choices can be unmade. Renting AI is a dangerous way to run a country. Thank you very much.